So continuing on with our discussion, so let's move on to the muscles, to the muscular system. So actually in particular the skeletal muscles. So here we will be discussing about the voluntary muscles and not the involuntary muscles. Basically the heart and the muscle linings of the arteries and the GI tract. So we will focus mostly on the skeletal muscles, the muscles that are linked to the bones. And basically, for muscle tissue is a type of contractile tissue. So we call it a contractile tissue because basically they contract. So they shorten. So there are three types of muscular tissue. We have the skeletal muscle, the cardiac muscle, and the smooth muscle. So the skeletal muscle is part of your skeletal-muscular system. So they are closely linked to the bones. The cardiac muscles are, well, of course, these are the muscles of the heart. So they are also contractile because, of course, your heart is pumping. And then for the smooth muscles, these are the muscles you find lining your arteries and the lining of your gastrointestinal tract. So for the arteries, they contract. They contract to control the cross-sectional area, to control the size of your arteries. So depending on of course your blood pressure and basically your heart rate. Now for your smooth muscles, the smooth muscle lining in your GI tract, so they are required for the peristaltic movement of the bolus or the food. Now skeletal muscles is part of the skeletal-muscular system. So their main function is to move the bones. So in general, each skeletal muscle has a belly, which is the middle portion of the muscle, an origin. The origin is the end of the muscle that remains stationary when the organ shortens. The insertion is the end that moves during contraction. So let's say for example the biceps. The origin of the biceps is in our shoulder joint region, basically your scapula and the joint, the scapula and the clavicle region. Now when you flex your arm, your shoulder is not moving. What is moving is the lower arm. So the insertion of your bicep is basically your the radius and the ulna, the bones of that the bones of your lower arm. So that when you flex it, so when it contracts, the one that is moving is your lower arm. So knowing the origin and insertion of any skeletal muscle offers clues about its function. In fact, sometimes we name the muscle based on where it is its origin and or the insertion. So skeletal muscle is composed of numerous elongated muscle cells. So they span from the origin to insertion, one nested inside the other. So muscle cells are also called the muscle fibers. So the muscle cells shorten, when they shorten, they create a tension. So of course, basically humahatak siya. So connective tissue structurally supports skeletal muscle. So here is your skeletal muscle. So most muscles work in pairs. So it can be synergistic or antagonistic. So synergistic, they work together to cause movement in the same direction. Although muscles are not, the muscle functions are not, they are not limited only to as pairs. So sometimes they move as a group, especially for complicated tasks. Now, for synergistic pairs, they work together to cause movement in the same direction. So, example, the muscles of the quadriceps or muscles of your hamstrings. For the antagonistic pairs, they cause movement in the opposite direction. So, they pull in a different direction. So, for example, is the biceps and the triceps. So, the biceps brings your lower arm, basically the radius forward, and the triceps extends your arm. So the prime mover is the agonist, the muscles that provide the movement, and the antagonist is the muscle that oppose the movement. So when we say agonist, it means prime mover. So here's an example of your muscles. So the origin is the one, the source where the muscle is anchored, basically. So this is your biceps. So this is anchored. This is called biceps. Bi because there are two insertions. So you have, or rather, there are two anchors. So you have the origin and the one at the insertion part. So this is the tendon that connects your biceps to your here is your shoulder. The scapula is the origin of your bicep, and its insertion is the radius. And then for your triceps, it's called triceps because 1, 2, 3. Okay, so and then you have your the origin is again in the shoulder region, which is your scapula. Actually, origins. So it's in the both the humerus and the scapula. So the biceps is not connected to the humerus. It's connected to the scapula. Now, and the insertion of the triceps is the ulna in the elbow. So basically, this antagonistic. They when they contract, they produce movement in opposite directions. So other skeletal-muscular system. So here are some muscles. So when we name muscles, we usually name it where it is located, the striations or the direction of the muscle fibers, basically the stripes, and or what the bones where it is anchored to. So depending. So for example, we have the trapezius because of the shape. We have the frontalis muscle because, well, of course, it's in the frontal lobe. Orbicularis oculi, so that means it's encircling your oculi, basically your eye. And you have your orbicularis oris, basically it's in the mouth. Actually, it helps if you really want to know the muscles, it helps to know the Latin name because we usually name them based on the Latin descriptions. Trapezius is based on the name. The same goes for the deltoid. So here is the actual visuals of here. So you have the deltoid muscle here, and then you have sternocleidomastoid. So here is a muscle that was named based on its origins and insertion. So that means sternocleidomastoid. It's connected to the sternum, to the clavicle, and mastoid, basically your the jaw. So it describes where it is located. And then we have the, say, rectus abdominis. So rectus, it describes the direction of your the muscle, and then abdominis where it's located. So it's located in the abdominal region. So those are some examples of naming the muscles. So this is the biceps. So that's your biceps, and this is your triceps. And then for the legs, so again, you have actually we most of the time it's named based on the fibularis, for example, fibularis longus muscle. So it's a Latin, so it's a long, basically the elongated, or rather, basically it's mostly a Latin description of your muscles. So those are the different types of the muscles. Okay, the skeletal muscle fibers. Let's look at specific the microscopic or the cellular part, or rather the cellular aspect of the muscles. So skeletal muscle fibers, or the cells, the muscle cells, they are long and multinucleated. So when you say multinucleated, they possess more than one nucleus. So each muscle is covered in a connective tissue layer and composed of fascicles, blood vessels, and nerves. So a fascicle is covered by a connective tissue and composed of individual muscle fibers. So a fascicle is basically a collection of your muscle fiber. Actually, if you notice, when you if you are fond of cooking and you are shredding chicken, so a fascicle is you can if you notice sometimes the flesh, in a chicken, for example, a chicken breast, you will see there that sometimes the flesh, the basically the muscle of the chicken, you can actually distinguish specific muscles or muscle groups, and even the directions of the different shreds of those chickens. So that is the muscle group is a collection of those shreds as one. So each fascicle is covered by a connective tissue and is composed of individual muscle fibers. So each muscle fiber is covered by a sarcolemma and composed of myofibrils surrounded by organelles. So we have T-tubules. Well, they are so-called T-tubules because they are shaped like a T. They conduct contraction message. So the mitochondria of the muscles provide the energy. Actually, this is where the red meat and the white meat part comes into action. Actually, we will discuss that later. The number of mitochondria and which muscle requires a large amount of mitochondria, which muscle does not. Okay, now we have sarcoplasmic reticulum that is used to store the calcium. So remember, calcium is needed for the contraction. So we have a reserve of calcium in our bones, but aside from that, there also a reserve of calcium in the muscles. So it is like having a cash on hand and cash in bank. So the cash in bank, you have your skeletons, rather the calcium in your bones, and then the cash on hand, these are the calcium in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So sarcomere is the functional unit of your myofibril. So myofibril is a muscle fiber. Contractile proteins are found within the myofibril. So you have the actin and the myosin. These are the two contractile proteins that play a large role in how in the muscle contraction. Basically, they are the reason why muscles contract. So here is your anatomy of the muscles. So this is your muscle cells. So you have a fascicle. So each fascicle is consist of your several bundles of your muscle. So this is your fascicle. The actual muscle, it contains fascicles, and you have your muscle fiber. Now, the muscle fiber here, it's actually a composed of your muscle fibers. This is your sarcomere, which is a contracting unit of your muscles. So they are bundles of that. They are arranged in such a way that they are arranged in a single direction. So this is one sarcomere. So the sarcomere, this is the contracting unit of your muscle. So you have several regions here that I think you should remember. The Z disc. So it separates one sarcomere to the other. So this is the Z disc. So looking at this one, this is the molecular view of your sarcomere. So this is the Z disc. So this connects the thin filament with the other 10 filaments. Now we have the thick and the thin filament. So the thick filament, these are the myosin molecules, and the thin filament, these are the actin molecules. So these are proteins, the actin and the myosin. That is why when you want to build up muscles, intake a lot of protein, because you will build up more myofibrils, or you will enhance or develop your contractile fibers there. Now, for the sarcomeres, aside from that, you have the I band and the A band. So the I band is the region from the end of your thick filament to the end of the thick filament and the next sarcomere. And then you have the A band, which is basically the length. It spans the entire length of your myosin or the thick filament. So this is your A band. Okay. Now, when the muscle contracts, it's pulled together such that the Z disc will come close to your to this myosin. So basically, the I band disappears, or shortens up. When it shortens until it disappears. So that's the contraction of the muscle. So the Z disc allow each sarcomere to connect to the another sarcomere. So the thin and the thick filaments, these are the actin and the myosin. So the I bands are areas where there is just the Z disc and the thin filament. So there is no myosin there. The A band is the area where there are overlapping thick and thin filaments. So the H zone is found in the A bands and contains only the thick filaments until the muscle contraction, of course. So this is the H zone. So in the H zone, there is no thin filament. So this is just the thick filament. So when it contracts, this is also shortened. So here, the thin filament will move here, same with this one here. So the sliding filament models, this is how muscles shorten. So basically, the contraction is that this filament here, the thick filament and the thin filament here, it will slide across the thick filament until it meets in the middle. So the two of them, it will slide along until it reaches the middle. So basically, the H zone disappears, and the same goes for the I band. It shortens because, of course, it's moving. This is moving to the left. This is the left. The left thin filament is moving to the right. The right thin filament is moving to the left. Okay, now Contraction starts with the nerve impulse. So, how does muscle contracts? Since it's a skeletal muscle, it's a voluntary muscle, plus it receives stimulus from your brain. So, if you will it to move, you will move. So, how does it do that? So, remember, the impulse is travels to the motor neurons, and from the motor neurons, it is the message, or the impulse, or the potential, the signal basically is transferred from the neuron to the muscle fiber. So this is through the use of acetylcholine. So the presynaptic neuron here, for example, this muscle is being innervated by this motor neuron. So when it's activated, so just like how the motor neurons, or rather the propagation of the signal across the synapse is between the neurons, you have your the motor neurons, or rather the presynaptic neuron, will release a neurotransmitter, and in this case for the muscles, it's the acetylcholine. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. So this is the actually it's not technically a synapse, but what you call a neuromuscular junction, because this is between the muscle and the neuron. So just like how it happens in the synapse, when the action potential reaches this the region, the ends of your axon, so this is the synaptic end bulb, so it will release the acetylcholine, and the acetylcholine will bind to the ligand-gated sodium channel. So this is the acetylcholine receptors, and it will open and allow the influx of your sodium. So, unlike the motor neurons, where the influx of the sodium will cause another electrical impulse, this time, it will send a signal for the muscle to contract. And this is the contraction. So, this is a sliding filament model. So, if you notice, this is the thick and thin filament. So, from the previous image, remember, the thick filament has many bulb-like protrusions here. So, those are, well, it's like a paddle. So, what happens in the paddle? So, at rest, so as long as you have a calcium and ATP present, ATP is the energy currency of the cell. So, as long as you have calcium and energy, so this is the calcium shown in purple. So, it binds to the thin filaments, which expose your actin active site. So, this is the calcium molecule. So, once it is bound to your actin, so this is your active site. So, at rest, this is your myosin. So it contains ATP here. So when the myosin heads react to an actin active site, it creates a cross bridge. So basically, the sliding filament here is that this paddle attachment of the myosin will bind to the active site, and it will actually push, or actually, well, the muscle is pulling, but in this case, it will push the actin filament it will push the actin filament in this direction. So you will have what you call a power stroke. So because of this power stroke, the actin fibers will slide across your myosin. So the myosin and then after the power stroke, so the myosin head picks up the fresh ATP, it drops the actin, and resets again to form this cross bridge. So basically, it's moving like so. It's like paddling. So if you know how to row a boat, so it's like the actin are paddling, or even if you look like the feet, as many feet that are pushing or moving the actin along the length of your thick filament. So basically, that's the contraction. So the whole muscle contractions, they require energy, because for every single movement, you require ATP. So there are ATP involved for every single movement. And of course, a single power stroke is not enough to actually move the whole muscle, because these are molecular in size. These are in the molecular scale, the molecular level. So how many power strokes do you think will be needed for the muscle to actually contract, visibly shorten? So muscle cells are grouped into motor units. So the motor units vary in the number of muscle fibers in each motor unit. So the larger motor units are involved in forceful contraction, and smaller motor units are involved in small, precise movement. So for example, the motor units in your arm is different from the motor units that are required to move your fingers. So muscle cells contract on an all or nothing basis, similar to how the action potential travels across the neuron. So in order for the muscles to contract, a threshold stimulus must be reached to trigger the release of your calcium. So the motor unit requires multiple stimuli. So the myogram here is a recording of a single contraction of a motor unit called a single twitch. So a single contraction. So a single twitch is not enough to produce body movement. So motor units require multiple stimuli in quick succession to build up the signal to trigger your contraction. So a tetanus is when a continuous contraction is achieved. So this is necessary to achieve posture such as holding up your head while walking, sitting, or running. So motor units are capable of recruitment of other motor units to achieve different strengths of contraction. So again, with regards to the energy, so how does a muscle how can they afford to have that large amount of energy in such a short period of time, such as moving your arm? So muscle contraction requires ATP in order to occur. So there are 3 ways how the muscle generate ATP. So this is through aerobic respiration, which is the most efficient method of ATP production. Why? Because for aerobic respiration, or other aerobic cellular respiration, for a single glucose molecule, you can actually generate 32 ATP. But also, since it's called aerobic, it requires oxygen to be present, and it is longer. It takes quite a longer time. Now, for the anaerobic respiration, this is inefficient because for a single single glucose molecule, you can only generate 2 ATP here. So 2 versus 32. So there is a very large difference here. So, but this happens when the muscle is lacking in oxygen, as well as anaerobic cellular respiration is much more faster in generating ATP than aerobic cellular respiration. But the problem here is that it produces lactic acid as a byproduct. And since this is acid, so not only does it require oxygen to be decomposed, it can also is also one of the ones that are being blamed when you get muscle pain after a very strenuous exercise and you feel pain. So that is because of the lactic acid production. That is also the reason why you after exercising, you need to do stretching to stimulate the blood flow again into your to the contracted muscles. And the third cause or third source of ATP is the creatine phosphate. So this is unique to the muscles because aside from the muscles, they are not found anywhere. So they are the storage of energy. So these are some alternative storage of energy for the muscles. So how does creatine phosphate works? So if at rest or without any strenuous exercise, your body or your muscles are storing up large amounts of creatine phosphate. So they produce creatine phosphate by spending ATP. So if you are at rest, you are doing aerobic cellular respiration, your muscles are doing aerobic cellular respiration. Some of the ATP that they are able to produce are used to create creatine phosphate. And then since ATP when it spends the energy, it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and then it can recruit more. It can be recycled to create more energy, more ATP. This ADP is recycled to create more ATP. Anyway, so using ATP, it creates many creatine phosphate, and these creatine phosphates are held in reserve. So during strenuous activity where you need a large amount of ATP, the creatine phosphate is then degraded. So they are used it as energy source to create ATP when you require actual ATP. So when basically during for example, since ATP is the currency, for example, during paydays or you have a lot of money, so you invest it in some say bonds or stocks, and when you require the money, you are going to withdraw it or you liquidate it back to ATP. So basically like that. So that's creatine phosphate used. Okay, now for the muscle twitches. So muscle twitches can be fast, intermediate, or slow. So for a fast twitch, these are usually, since this is fast, this is anaerobic because again, anaerobic respiration is faster. So they provide short bursts of extreme energy and contraction power. So they are found in muscles that are thicker, has fewer mitochondria, and usually contain larger amount of glycogen. Glycogen is the storage form of glucose because anaerobic respiration requires more, because remember, for anaerobic, it's 2 ATP for every glucose molecule. So in order to create a large amount of ATP in a short amount of time, you need to have a large amount of also glucose. And then we have the intermediate or the fast oxidative glycolytic. So they are intermediate in size and power and are light red, and they contain myoglobin. Myoglobin is the protein molecule that stores oxygen in the muscles. So when your muscles require large amount of oxygen immediately, they can be used to provide that oxygen because they are used to store the oxygen. And then we have the slow twitch. So they appear red. These muscles appear red. So basically, this is the red meat and the white meat analogy. So they appear red because they have a large blood supply, have many mitochondria within their sarcolemma, and store an oxygen carrying protein called the myoglobin. So if I'm going to compare it with the muscles in the chicken, so the fast twitch muscles are the muscles in the breast. So they are the white meat. Why is it fast twitch? Because remember, for example, when a bird flaps the wings, they must flap it very fast. So they are larger. They contain fewer mitochondria because the mitochondria is used for aerobic respiration. And since this muscle does not rely too much on aerobic respiration, they do not really have that much amount of mitochondria. And because this anaerobic, they do not have, or rather they have limited supply of myoglobin. So that's why they are light color. Because the color of the muscle is the reddish color of the muscle is because of the myoglobin. Anyway, this is for the muscles in the breast. So that is the white meat. And then for the slow twitch, this is the red meat. So you have a large amount of mitochondria, you have a large amount of myoglobin there. So you have basically the muscles there, they are actually also for movement, but they do not really require a very fast movement. So you have the muscles in the thigh part of the chicken, for instance. So although training can alter the functioning of the both red and the white fibers, it does not change their proportion. So the percentage of the fast and slow twitch fibers is genetically determined. So toned muscles work better, they look better. So muscle tones. So a weak sustained contraction that keeps the muscle taut. So toned muscles are more efficient at burning energy. So exercise and chemical compounds can change the size of your muscle. So testosterone and other anabolic steroids have long been used to achieve bigger muscle mass. The side effects of these are liver dysfunction, testicular disease, and kidney disease. So sometimes if you want to build muscles and you do not want to exercise, they use those testosterone and steroids. But again, this is not healthy. It's the best way to actually build up your muscle is actually to exercise. So hypertrophy is muscle enlargement, and of course, because short bursts of power come from these fibers, exercises that continuously require bursts of power will enlarge them. So what are those exercises? Weightlifting is a short burst type of exercise. So these are, basically weight training. Put demands on fast twitch fibers, resulting in hypertrophy. So you have enlargement of muscle. Why is it, why muscle enlargement on fast twitch? Because remember, the fast twitch muscles tend to be thicker. And when you want to build muscle, you want, of course, for them to become more visible, you want them thicker. So make them, or rather, enhance the fast twitch muscles. So basically that's it for the muscles and muscle movement. So see you. I hope you learned a lot in this course. So thank you.